Hey you, and welcome to 2024. So color management is a really huge topic, and I've done a few videos on it already covering various aspects. Now what I want to do with this video in particular is put together a comprehensive guide that everybody can use and reference and come back to in case you ever need it, that both explains what color management is and shows you the two methods to set it up within Resolve. I'll briefly touch on some other aspects. For example, I'll help define and show you what color space and gamma is, but just keep in mind that's not the main focus of this video, but I will be covering it because it's directly related to color management and you should know those terms. Each of these topics on their own, including color management and color space and gamma, can span multiple videos all on themselves as separate topics, but it's good to have at least a basic understanding of all of these topics in order to help you in your color grading journey and to better help you understand what's going on within Resolve. Now, if you want me to expand on any of the topics that I cover in this video, make sure you let me know in the comments down below. You can always ask questions. I'll be around to answer them as well. And don't forget to like this video, share it, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well. So what is color management? Let's start with that. In very basic terms, it's a set of processes or standards that help ensure accurate color and gamma representation across various devices and screens. Now that's done a little bit differently in every program, but in Resolve, it's a set of mathematical transforms to ensure we're going from one color and gamma to another in a standardized way. The way that you'll see that represented in Resolve is by specifying what camera did you use to capture the material. That comes in a particular color space and a gamma. What color space do you want to transform that footage in order to work in? So what's your working color space? And finally, what color space do you want to output your work to? For the rest of the video, you'll probably hear me refer to these as your input, working, or timeline, and output color spaces. So just a quick example here, looking at Resolve, would be this footage that was shot on an RE camera. I need to get it from what that camera saw and captured into a working color space, which is called an intermediate or working or timeline color space. Technically, you can work on this clip without an intermediate color space, and you can just start twisting knobs like adding contrast and saturation. You can even get it to a halfway decent starting point. The problem becomes, I don't know what I just turned this image into. There's also no reasonable and easy way for me to copy these exact changes to any other clip I might be working with and expect the same outcome. For those reasons, we need a standardized way to transform all of our footage into a working color space and then out to a standardized output color and gamma. Properly transforming our clips also allows our tools within Resolve, so that would be like your lift, gamma, gain wheels, your offset wheels, and all that kind of stuff, to ensure that they work consistently through all clips because you're working in a common color space. Now lastly, from our working or our timeline color space, we then have to transform the clip again into an output color space that our monitors and computers and everything else can reproduce easily. That's because our monitors and our computers and other viewing platforms like TVs and all the rest were not made to output Arri Log C or DaVinci Wide Gamut or ACES, which are all different color spaces and have their own gammas. They were made to reproduce something like Rec 709 most of the time. So for that, we have to transform our footage again into, let's say, for example, Rec 709, which is what most consumer monitors can reproduce. You also have the option to deliver to other formats, for example, P3 D65. For those of you unfamiliar with what P3 D65 is, it's just another color space and gamma, mostly dealing with like HDR or high dynamic range content deliverables. Now, that's just an example, and it's just to say that Rec 709 isn't the only deliverable option you have, but it's one of the most common ones, especially when dealing with online work or SDR type of work, which is standard definition deliverables. Also, just as a small aside, if you're looking to start your career as in color grading or whatever, if you're going to deliver in a certain format, you want to make sure that you're working with the appropriate tools. So that means having a monitor, a professional monitor that's calibrated to the color space that you're delivering for. You never want to master like a P3 D65 deliverable on a monitor that only goes up to or is calibrated for Rec 709. It's not going to work. You have no way of guaranteeing what you're delivering as an end result. So make sure you're working with the right tools, make sure it's calibrated. If you're at that level though, you probably already know that, and you're working with the correct tools. Back to color spaces and gamma though for a second. In order to give you a better idea of what's going on, let me show you this graphic. Now this is known as a CIE graph. You may have seen it in Resolve if you click through your scopes. As with any tool, this is showing us something, right? Some type of information. In this case, it's the visible color spectrum or observable colors. As you can see is the case when you're working with RE footage, we're trying to go from the green triangle to the white triangle. What does that mean in particular? It means that the camera has a much larger set of colors that it can capture. Colors that when interpreted are far outside the range monitors can reproduce, which is, like I said, the smaller white triangle, which is Rec. 709. So this is part of the reason why color management is so important. It can help you reliably translate what was captured into a standardized working color space and then into a standardized display image. Real quick, since I said I'd briefly cover this, the other side of the equation is gamma. Gamma essentially refers to a tonal curve. It's basically a tonal curve. That's like your luminance curves in Resolve, or very similar anyway. It's taking all values in and modifying that to a different output. You can see, for example, that if we look at what a CST does through a grayscale image, this is the transformation to Rec. 709. As you can see, it basically looks like something that you could draw sort of in your curves graph. So essentially that's what it's doing behind the scenes. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that. I just wanted to give you kind of a high level view of sort of what it does. Resolve isn't just freehanding like a log curve or an S curve or whatever. There's actually math behind it and a standardized transform, but essentially that's a visual representation of what it ends up doing. All right, so we've talked about what color management does. I've kind of given you a little bit of a definition of what color space and gamma are and what color management is intended to do with those things. So now that we have that, let's jump into Resolve and look at practically how to set this up. So what I'm going to show you is two methods now, two ways to set up color management in Resolve. And you can pick either one of these methods, and I'll go over the pros and cons as we go along. Now, the first method is setting it up in color management within project settings. Once you're in Resolve, you go down to the bottom right here and click on the little gear icon. That will bring up your project settings. On the left side of the window, you'll see we have some option for different settings. Click on color management, and that brings up the color options. We'll just be looking at the top section here under color space and transforms. Under the first dropdown for color science, you'll see a few options. By default, when you open up a project, it's set to DaVinci YRGB. That sounds like something is happening, but it's not. This is just the default and basically means no color management is happening within Resolve. Resolve will essentially let you do your own thing, and if you plan on color managing your project in individual nodes, which I'll be covering, I'll go over that in the next method, then just leave it on YRGB. The other options that you can see here are DaVinci YRGB Color Managed and then the two ACES options. Now ACES stands for Academy Color Encoding System. That's its own standard for color managing and handling all that stuff. I do use it sometimes within my projects and I like ACES, but I won't be going over it for the purposes of this video. For the purposes of this video, I'll leave it with DaVinci Wide Gamut, which is one of the most common ones you'll see out there, and a lot of colorists color manage in DaVinci Wide Gamut as well. I'll do another video later on talking about what the differences between all these different color spaces are, but essentially DaVinci Wide Gamut is one of the ones that people will work in as a working color timeline, and ACES is the same thing. ACES will be your working color space, and then you'll output to Rec. 709 just as usual. But like I said, for purposes of this video, we won't cover that. That being said, I'll be color managing in DaVinci Wide Gamut, which is Resolve's standard of color management. In order to get there, we can do the drop down and select DaVinci YRGB Color Managed. Resolve will then color manage your project based on the options you select here down below. The default, after you click that, will be this automatic color management option, which is checked here, and that picks the most common options for you. In order to truly understand color management, though, I suggest you skip this option. There are too many options that are hidden under the hood here, and I'd rather you understand the step-by-step process and see it laid out. It's more to learn initially, but you can ensure everything is correct for your project, and I promise once you go through it a couple of times, it'll be fairly easy. So you're gonna uncheck auto color management, and that opens up some more options, but still not what we're looking for. What we're gonna do is we're gonna do the drop down and then go to custom under color processing mode. So now we're getting somewhere. This will look like a lot of info, but we'll make sense of it, so just stick with me here for a bit. For me, I just work my way from top to bottom. So first is input color space. This will be what your camera shot in. I'm using an ARRI clip, so let's assume that the rest of my timeline is also ARRI. In this case, I know it was shot on ARRI Log C3. You'll want to pick whatever your camera space was. So Canon Cine, Canon Log, if it was shot on a Canon camera with Log, or S Cine S-Log2 or S-Log3 if it's a Sony camera, and so on. It's very important that you know what color space and gamma you shot in, or the stuff that you're working on was shot in. If it's your own camera, then you should have a good idea of what color space and gamma it was. You can check your settings or just look at it, but you should have a pretty good idea. If it's material from somebody else that you're working with, or a DP, for example, on a shoot, you'll want to get the information from them to make sure that you are properly color managing, because the input color space does make a big difference and needs to be the correct one when you pick it. So next is timeline color space. This is the same thing as working color space. This will be the color space you transform your footage into in order to work with it. I usually work in DaVinci Wide Gamut, so here I'll pick DaVinci Wide Gamut / DaVinci Intermediate. Here in project settings, the gamut or color space and the gamma are listed as one with the slash between them. Keep that in mind for when we do this in nodes. The options will be separated there in nodes. Now let's skip down to output color space. This will be your delivery format. So in my case, I said Rec 709. Just something to keep in mind though, there are several flavors of Rec 709, but most common is going to be Gamma 2.4, so I'll pick that one. All right, so real quick, just to summarize what I've done so far, this is taking my ARRI footage and transforming it to DaVinci Wide Gamut, where I can do my color grading, so that's where all my nodes are going to be in DaVinci Wide Gamut, and then transforming it to my monitor display, which is Rec 709. I'm not going to go over all the other options here in this video. Usually Resolve is fairly good with its options, so you shouldn't run into too much trouble with just sticking with the defaults. I'll definitely cover this in future videos, but to get you started on color management, this is most of what you need to know. The only thing I'll do here is usually change this to luminance mapping, just because I prefer the outcome of that or how it looks. And all right, so let's hit save here. And if you watch the image behind the settings, you'll see that the image normalizes after you hit save. I'm getting a healthy baseline of contrast and saturation here. It's no longer the flat log image that I started with. And now I can start grading here in my nodes, and Resolve is taking care of the rest behind the scenes based on the options we choose, with the final output of your monitor here being Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. All right, so the pros of this method. One, it's fairly simple. You basically just go down the list and pick your options. Once you hit the save button, Resolve basically takes over and handles everything behind the scenes, so it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. You've done your color managing for the project, and Resolve takes care of the rest. Another pro is that it also really doesn't complicate your node graph at all, and you'll see what I mean by that in the second option, but essentially, once you hit save and go back to your color grading, you can just start adding your nodes and start with exposure and contrast and balance and all that kind of stuff, and you don't need any extra nodes in your node graph or your node tree. As you saw with the image that I was working on, once you hit the save button, the clip normalized and it's color management, so Resolve takes over from there. The advantage with that as well is that any additional clips that you drop in or any additional clips that you have on your timeline will also automatically be color managed based on the options that you chose in your settings. And that's right off the bat. You don't need to do anything extra. Your whole project is color managed the same way. The cons, at least for me, and keep in mind this is from my point of view, so if these cons don't really apply to you or you can work around it, then these aren't really cons for you. But for me anyways, the process remains fairly hidden and sort of out of sight. I like to see the whole process from top to bottom, especially when I'm working with my clips, so the fact that all of this color management is hidden away in the menus, for me, is a negative, and the fact that you can't step through it step by step looking at every single node, I prefer that way of working. And to me, having it color managed in the project settings also makes it more difficult to color manage clips that are of a different color space. So let's say you're not working with all ARRI footage. It makes color managing the rest of the clips a little bit more difficult, at least to me, compared to the method that I'll show you in a minute. All right, so method 2, what is it? This is color managing in individual nodes. This isn't done through the menus, but rather through color space transforms, which is applied to individual nodes in your node tree. One thing we have to do first, though, is to set ourselves up for this, which is to make sure that Resolve isn't color managing for us. Right now, you'll see my image is still normalized because I haven't changed it back. So here we need to get rid of that. In order to do that, I will go to project settings again, and under color science, I want to go back to DaVinci YRGB, which means Resolve will not be doing any color management for us. The only thing that I'm going to update here, which you'll have to update these settings, there's just two now, and that's to say that the timeline color space is going to be DaVinci Wide Gamut, and your output will be Rec. 709. These particular options aren't color managing anything. You'll see that once I hit save, it'll go back to the log image that I had at the beginning. It's just giving the tools within Resolve a reference. We still have to set up the color management outside of this. So in order to do that, we'll use color space transforms, or CST. CST is an effect, so to find it, you'll have to go up to the top right of your Resolve color page and click Effects so that the effects panel comes up. Color space transform is under the Resolve FX color, so you can just scroll until you find it. Or at the top, you can click the little magnifying glass and search for it. Once you find it, you can also hover on it, and if you go all the way to the right, you can click this little star to favorite it. That way, it'll just be added to your favorites options, and if you click over to your favorites menu, which is at the top of the effects panel here, you'll just see the effects that you use all the time, or the ones that you favorite anyway. Now, in the node tree here, where you'll find all of your nodes, we haven't done any grading yet, so you can see we just have the one serial node here that isn't doing anything. If you have anything there, or you're not sure, you can always right-click in the node tree background here and go to Reset All Grades and Nodes. That'll wipe out anything you have on this clip. Now we can go over and grab our transform and drop it directly on the first node here. In the effect panel, you'll see it's changed a bit, but we now have very similar options to project settings. Now, when you're color managing in nodes, there's an extra step, and this first node is going to be just the first half of our transform we need to do. But the logic follows the same format, so what do we need to do first? If you've been following this whole time, you'll know we need to go from input color and gamma into a working color and gamma. So let's start at the top. Input color is going to be RE Wide Gamut 3. The input gamma will be ARRI log C3. Remember, this is slightly different than project settings since CST splits up the color and the gamma, but it's the same idea. Now, output color space is just what this particular node is going to output, not what we want to ultimately end up in. So with nodes, this is going to be your first node every time. To follow it logically, you just look at the node graph. You have an input in and an output for every single node. So the image will pass through here to be converted by the CST and then output to whatever you want. In our case, we want to go to our working color space. So for output, I'll put DaVinci Wide Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate. I'm also going to turn these off for now because we don't need it on this first transform. Okay, so we have the first half of our necessary color management. The second half will be fairly similar, so let's hit Option or Alt S to add another serial node, and then add another CST effect to this node as well. It'll be blank again, so let's fill it out. Now for this one, we're receiving something different. If we follow the node tree, we're outputting DaVinci Wide Gamut from the first node, so the input of this node will not be the camera space, but rather the DaVinci Wide Gamut that the first node is outputting. Make sense? Now for output color space, this will be the last node in our node tree every time, so I'm going to choose my final output of Rec. 709 Gamma 24. Now you'll see once I've chosen my options, the image normalizes once again, and now we can start grading. I like to rearrange the nodes in my tree if I'm doing it all in one here and label, so I'll rename the first node CST in and the last one CST out. You can choose whatever naming system works better for you. I've seen some people label it, in and then to Rec. 709 or whatever you want to call it, but as long as you know and can recognize it, that's all that matters. I usually, if I'm leaving the nodes here, will pull the last CST over to the bottom so that I know it's last, and then you can come over to your first one and add another node and start grading. Whatever organization system works better for you, this one just happens to work for me. So all of my color grading, because I want to grade in my intermediate or timeline color space, will take place between my first CST and my last output CST. That way I'm in my working color space of DaVinci Wide Gamut and all my tools will work consistently. The reason for that is because we're outputting DaVinci Wide Gamut here, and we also told Resolve in the project settings that our working color space will be DaVinci Wide Gamut as well. Now, if you have multiple clips in your timeline, you can either go up to your clips here, select your clips option, which will bring up all of the current timeline clips, or you can also go to Lightbox, which is up here at the very top right of the color page. This will also show you a view of all of your clips as well. Either one works, but essentially you can then Control or Command A to select all. And if you press the middle mouse button on this clip, which you did your CSTs in, that should ripple your current nodes on the clip you click on to all of the other clips. So that's one way to get these CST nodes to your entire timeline. I like to do that before I set up any other nodes, or if I have a template node tree, for example, I'll middle click once I have that in there. That way, all of the timeline receives the same nodes and they're blank for the most part, except for the CSTs that I set up already. That way, every single clip that I click into has the same setup before I begin. All right, so another way, which I usually use, especially if I'm working with clips that come from different types of cameras, is by using clip groups. So if you right click on your clip here, you can add to a new or current group. You have that option in this menu. And current group is if you already have one set up. I'm just gonna assume that we have no group set up yet, so we'll start fresh. This way, when I set up the groups and add all the rest of the clips to it, if they're from one camera, then I'll have all clips from the same camera together in the same group, which is my ultimate goal. So if I click add to new group, you'll see actually up at the top before I do that in the node tree, I only have 2 pages right now where I can add my nodes and color grade. I'm currently on the clip level. It says clip right here. And the second page is for timeline. Clip only affects the current clip that I'm on. So all of the nodes in here will only affect this one clip, and the timeline affects the entire timeline. No matter what group it's in, it'll affect the entire timeline. So nodes you add at the timeline level don't have to be shared to other nodes by middle mouse clicking. Resolve just automatically does that because every clip receives the same timeline nodes that are in here. But let's go back and add to a new group, and now you'll see I have 4 pages up here. If you scroll through them, it's group pre-clip, clip, group post-clip, and timeline. So the cool thing about it this way is I can do my first color space transform in my group pre-clip, and then my output transform on the timeline page. And so every clip in that group will now get both. I don't have to worry about highlighting all of my clips and making sure they all get the same nodes. Once that's set up, I'll still do all of the rest of my color grading here at the clip level. Now keep in mind, if you have clips that are outside of this group, so for example, let's say I have some other clips that are from another type of camera and I did not add them to this group, I'll need to create a separate group for those and then create its own group pre-clip CST transform. So I'll need to set that up for the other groups as well. It's a little bit more time consuming, but like I said, you can follow it. You can follow the whole node tree and see all of your structure once you're done. It shouldn't be that hard because typically you won't have a bunch of different cameras. The 2 or 3 groups that you usually need to set up should take care of everything. The good thing is that all of the clips on your timeline still get the timeline CST out to Rec 709. You just need to set up the group pre-clip CST, which will go from your camera to your working color space. All right, so the pros and cons of this method. Well, the pros, at least for me, is that I can follow the whole process. Essentially, I can click through all the different pages of my nodes and see exactly where I'm transforming and to what and when, exactly as I need to on every single clip. This also allows me to do things like change the color space of one individual node in my node tree. For example, in the other video that I did about filmic saturation, I switched one of the nodes to the HSV color space. That way I can label it in my node tree and I can see exactly when I'm transforming to that color space and then back out to all my other nodes. So this offers me a little bit more control, which personally I like. Now, on the very rare occasion where I need to do something either before the input CST or I need to add something after the output CST, I have the option to do so because here I can see the nodes and I can just add a node before that or after that, depending on which one I want to work on. Now, that's usually a very rare circumstance and that doesn't typically happen, but if the situation ever does arrive, in the very few cases, I have that option because it's not hidden in menus. I can actually see the nodes and where the transforms are happening. At least to my mind, this also allows me to handle different input color space transforms easier between the different groups as well and the different cameras. Like I said, I can just group everything together and ensure that I have the proper transform that goes with the proper camera. Along with that, I also get all the different compression options different per camera as well. Now, usually they kind of end up being the same anyway because I think that's just what looks best, but occasionally for a particular camera, I may like what another transform is doing better, so now I have the option to choose that individually per camera. Now, most of the time, this just amounts to having a little bit more granular control in very few scenarios if it comes up. Will that level of granular control usually come up in those very few scenarios to put this method of color management in nodes over doing it in project settings? No, I wouldn't say so. To be honest, it's just a preference. I've seen professional colorists do it in project settings, and I've also seen other ones do it in CSTs. Honestly, it's more of a preference, how you like to work. I think the node method allows you to understand color space transforms a little bit better as well. And like I said, for me, I just enjoy the additional control, but you pick your own option. If you do it in project settings, that's fine as well. I don't really think in most occurrences, in most scenarios, that you're gonna run into any trouble. All right, so that's where I'm gonna leave it for this video. It was probably a long one, but I did say that I wanted kind of a reference guide in order to help you set up and learn what color management is. So I'm gonna leave this video and hopefully it can be a reference from here on out on the channel. Hopefully I broke everything down enough. Now it's an enormous topic and there's a lot of different things within this one topic of color management. So if you feel like you still have questions, that's all right, no worries. I had questions too after I first got started, and there's a lot to understand about all of these different pieces, but this will give you a basic understanding, at least to get you started with color management, and we'll definitely be building on these topics as we go along with more videos. Also, feel free to ask any questions that you may have down below in the comments. I'll do my best to answer and help you guys out as much as I can. As always, like, comment, share, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you so much for watching if you've made it this far, and until next time, go out there and create something. La vedere.